Well, Lincoln was wrong. It turns out you can fool all the people all the time. If I'm introduced as a guru, the world is upside down. But I'm honored to be here. It's a special thing for Pew Internet to. Sorry, I'm fiddling around here. It's a special thing for Pew Internet to be at places like this, because we don't aspire to tell you what to think or what to do. We self-describe as a fact tank, not as a think tank. One of the wonderful things that is in evidence in this town and in this building. Think tanks are in the business of hiring really smart people to notice what there are for problems in the culture and come up with solutions to those problems and then aggressively promote those solutions. That's not the line of work that we are in. We don't advocate for anything. There is no agenda driving our research or our work. We're not funded to be cheerleaders for technology, for the internet, for broadband, for anything like that. We don't have policy positions that we are trying to encourage on the world on things like net neutrality, on privacy, or things like that. We are observers of the world, and we hope that our analysis, we do lots of national surveys and global surveys about issues that we think are interesting, but we don't tell you how to use that material. We hope it's useful to you, but we don't tell you how to do it, how to interpret it or use it for your own purposes. So this is a wonderful place for Pew Research to be, and it's a real honor to be among you. And with my colleagues back at the office 2 blocks away, this is a big win for that folks like you are interested in the things that we find. I want to make 2 public service announcements before I start running through our data. The first is that I've been asked to talk about the situation in the United States. This is IGF USA, so I'm going to be giving you a whole bunch of data about the current state of digital divides in the United States. It's obviously applicable to the global situation, and I suspect one of the great services that IGF USA provides to the IGF international community is you tell the American story, which is a story that's a little bit more advanced than lots of other places, and so it has things to teach just because of that. But the other thing that we know is there are other places collecting data about the international situation, including Pew. So we have a unit at the Pew Research Center that focuses on global attitudes, and they've done a tremendous amount of work covering digital divides across the globe. So if you want to find out what Pew has said, and I'll answer questions about it later on if you want, but if you want to find out what Pew has said about the state of play with digital divides and digital access around the world, if you go to pewresearch.org and look for the Global Attitudes tab, you'll be able to find that information. The second public service announcement is that you can make news here. There are amazingly hungry and amazingly talented journalists here from Elon University who are covering the heck out of this event, like they have covered other IGF meetings, ISOC meetings, international forums. And so if you have things to say and news to make, they would be interested in hearing from you. So seek them out and make sure that they know what you had to say. There are a lot of ways to talk about digital divides, and in our data from the very beginning, when we began studying it in the United States in the year 2000, there were any number of factors that were indicators of who was using and who was not using the internet. So I'm going to run through a bunch of that, and in doing so, I'm going to tell you a story about how digital divides and the concept of digital divides has evolved over the 16 years that we've been doing this work. My friend Larry Irving, when he was at the U.S. Commerce Department in the 1990s, actually coined the term digital divides, and at the time he conceptualized it, it was an access issue. You know, there were ways that people were talking about who was using and who was not using the internet, and that alone was a big definer of what was going on in the culture and a big divider of what was going on in the culture. And it's been interesting to watch in the United States how the whole idea of digital divides has now grown in some respects, even as access issues continue to be a central focus of lots of people in this room, as well as some of our work. So let me start by running through some of these factors that we've seen have been consistent indicators of use and non-use of the internet. And it starts with household income. These are all newest data. In many cases, we haven't released this data. So in some respects, I'm making news here, although the sort of big, grand story that I'm telling is a very, very familiar one. There are certain factors that always predict internet use and non-use. Those are true in 2016 as they were in 1996, but the numbers have changed a little bit. So household income matters. If you're poorer, you're less likely to use the internet. These days, if you're in a household that earns less than $30,000 a year, about 3/4 of those people use the internet, compared with the 99% of those who live in households earning $150,000 or over. These are data over time about how those differences have played out, and you can see from day one when we started measuring it at Pew Research, those who were poorer were less likely to be online than those who are richer. But it's still an important thing to note that 3/4 of those who are in relatively poor households are now internet users. So the gaps have persisted in many respects and have been actually fairly consistent over the years. The percentage point difference between the highest income and the lower income folks in our data has been relatively constant over time. But the grand story, of course, is that access has grown, and that even those who are in relatively poor households are in a lot better shape now than they were before. It's also the case in broadband, although it's more pronounced with broadband access. About 2/3 of American households now have home broadband access. And an interesting part of the story that we've captured in the past, well, actually, I'll show you that slide in a little bit. But an interesting part of that story is that broadband access has plateaued in the past 4 or 5 years. That number has not budged very much, and in matter of fact, went down a little bit in 2015 compared with years before. But broadband access, home broadband access is pronounced. About people who are in households earning less than $30,000 are about half as likely to have home broadband as people who are in those higher income brackets. Mobile connectivity has grown, and a huge part of the story in the United States, as it has been around the world, is that people who have mobile internet connections are now sort of in the vanguard of what's happening with access issues. 3/4 of American adults now access the internet at least one way, shape, or form with a mobile device, a smartphone or a tablet or a wirelessly connected laptop. And 96% of those who are in higher income households connect mobilely. It's not their only point of access. As a matter of fact, the story as you move up the income chain here is that people have multiple points of access the higher their income gets. And they are ubiquitous internet users as opposed to people who are in lesser income and other circumstances because they might only depend on or have one access device to use. Smartphone ownership is an amazing part of the story. The smartphone is the fastest deploying consumer electronic technology in the United States and probably in the world in human history. And one of the big stories about technology adoption is that the arc of adoption has collapsed in the internet age as more and more people adopt more and more stuff more quickly than ever before. The story about broadband adoption is slower than the story about smartphone adoption, but it's still an amazing part of the story. Now more than 2/3 of American adults have smartphones, 90% of those in highest income families have it, and about 80% of teenagers have smartphones as well. Educational attainment is also a major part of the story. Of course, it coincides a lot with the income story. But from a social scientist point of view, if you know someone's level of education, you know a lot about them, even more so than you know about their household income. So this is an independent predictor of whether someone is an internet user or not. Again, sort of those with higher levels of education are more likely to be internet users overall than people with lower levels of education. That one on the left there is less than high school, people who have not graduated from high school. The one next to it is high school diploma, just for those of you who are following along with that. Again, this gap has persisted over time, but it's an interesting part of the story that 69%, last year, 69% of those who did not have high school diplomas still were internet users. So again, the story is sort of a mixed story. There are gaps that persist, but the overall adoption story is quite striking. Home broadband use by educational attainment is much more pronounced. Those with the highest levels of education, a college degree or more, are 4 times as likely as those without a high school diploma to be home broadband users. Those with college educations are almost 2 times as much more likely to have home broadband as those without high school diplomas. And the smartphone story is still the same, that those who have college degrees or higher are very, very likely to be smartphone users compared to those who don't have that level of education. The race and ethnicity story in the United States was a starting point for Larry when he did that work at the Department of Commerce, and it was really important in defining sort of the urgency of adoption. In our data, what's really interesting about it is that when we first started measuring differences by race and ethnicity in the year 2000, they were independent predictors of non-use of the internet. In other words, no matter what your income was or your education level was, if you were African American, you were less likely to use the internet than white Americans. Same with Hispanics compared with white Americans. That story has vanished, though, in the past decade. That it's usually a class story more than a race story in terms of the statistical analysis you do looking at who's an internet user or not. But it still matters, and it matters to people in this room, so I'm going to show it to you. Right now, for just overall internet use, and I should point out that this question is, do you use the internet? We don't ask you how, we don't ask you where, we just want to know if you consider yourself a user. So it's partly a self-definition question, but it's also not necessarily tied to particular kinds of access, and that these are not statistically significant differences. 89% of whites are internet users, 81% of blacks and Hispanics are internet users. It's not an independent predictor of internet use or not. There's still some relationship to this story over time. Again, when we were starting to look at this in 2000, being black or being Hispanic was an independent predictor of non-use of the internet. It's not the case anymore. The highest line here is Asian Americans. In our normal, everyday surveys, where we talk to between 1,500 and 2,000 adults in our surveys, we don't quite pick up enough Asian Americans to tell you month by month what's going on, but we can combine those data over years, and these are the story for Asian Americans, English-speaking Asian Americans, by the way. When we don't give our surveys in multiple Asian languages, we do give them in Spanish. If you choose to take our survey in Spanish, we talk to you in Spanish, and I will tell you a little bit about that data in a minute. But you can see there are some differences that are tied to ethnicity, but they're not, and race, but they're not too terribly strong. The broadband story is a little bit more interesting and more powerful in terms of predictiveness. If you are black or Hispanic, you are statistically less likely to be a home broadband user than whites. But in mobile connectivity, those differences go away. So an important part of the story in America is that particularly for blacks and Hispanics, mobile connectivity has narrowed the gap of access overall. There's a huge amount of work to be done to understand what that means, because it does provide you access. A smartphone is a powerful way to get online and get the information you want, but it's clear that on small screens, you can't quite do the same kind of stuff, especially with a wireless connection. You can't do the same kind of stuff as easily as you can on a laptop or a desktop. And one of the things that we found in our data is that, particularly when you're doing things like job search or skills upgrading or taking courses or things like that, or filing even a resume for a job application, if you have a smartphone only, or if you're dependent on your smartphone, you are sort of struggling more to do what you need to do compared with if you were doing it on a wired computer kind of device. So there's an interesting complexity in this story about access getting better for lots of groups in the culture who hadn't necessarily been online before, but it's a different kind of access, and it does affect the kinds of things that they can do and the kinds of outcomes that they get. As smartphone owners by race, there's no difference now among the races in smartphone ownership. And age is always a strong predictor of internet use, or actually age is a strong predictor of almost any kind of innovation, adoption, fill in the blank, you know, in agriculture and education policy and technology use. You know, younger folks are more likely than older folks to be interested and engaged and pick this stuff up faster than older folks, and that shows up in our data in a lot of different ways. It starts with just internet adoption overall. 66% of those who are 65 and older use the internet now. The number drops off actually pretty dramatically when you get to about age 72. Then there's a much less likely capacity for people to be online. But you know, it's still an amazing story that now 2/3 of American adults 65 and older consider themselves internet users. And in many cases, they were sort of encouraged or pulled or prodded online by their kids and their grandkids, right? And that's especially the story with social media. They're pretty heavy social media users once they get online. And it's an interesting thing that their grandkids will say, if you want pictures of me, if you want to find out what I'm doing, you've got to friend me on Facebook. But it's freaking the younger folks out, of course, that their parents and grandparents are following them online. So there's an amazing amount of tension in families about what's disclosed on social media and not. And that first conversation about, will you friend me, asks mom of Junior, and Junior's freaks out and then moves to Snapchat is usually what's partly going on. These age gaps have persisted over time, and that's how those data look. Broadband adoption is the same. If you're over 65, you're less likely by a lot than those who are younger adults to have home broadband. Mobile connectivity is even more a pronounced story. If you're over 65, you're half as likely to be a mobile connector as those who are between 18 and 29. And smartphone ownership also plays out in that same way. Although, again, sort of the fact that 1/3 of those who are 65 and older are now smartphone users is a pretty important thing to note, and it's something not to be sneezed at. There's a lot of interest in the United States about community type, whether you're urban, rural, or suburban, and so these are our data on that. In interesting ways, the rural story is a pretty encouraging story. And in overall internet use, rural residents are almost as likely as suburban and urban residents to be internet users. The gap was a little bit bigger in 2000 when we first started measuring it, and it's narrowed a bit, and it's certainly, you know, it's a fairly encouraging story that almost 80% of rural residents are now online. Here's a wonderful map. The Commerce Department's work on this is amazing, and I suppose the Commerce officials who will talk to you later will be talking about this, and their concerns about it, but it's really robust, and here's a way that they are talking about internet adoption in the United States. These are 2013 data. And it just, you know, shows a persistent pattern of where there are high areas of poverty, high areas where there are high concentrations of minorities. They're less likely to be internet users. Home broadband is a story where if you're a rural resident, you're statistically less likely to be a home broadband user than if you were in an urban or suburban area. That map was a pretty clear demonstration of that too. Mobile connectivity is also a little bit less likely to occur in rural areas than in urban and suburban areas. And smartphone ownership is, again, there's a gap. There's an 11-point or a 13-point gap, a 15-point gap between rural residents and other folks in other parts of the United States. The two other things that we pick up on our data that are sometimes are very powerful indicators of whether someone's an internet user, so this is just about internet user, and broadband at home, those with disabilities are statistically significantly less likely to be internet users than not. These are relatively old data, 2010, but it persists in our data today, and it's partly a story about income, and it's partly a story about the higher cost of access, maybe for some people who need devices to retool to make them usable to them, and it's partly a struggle about, you know, are these digital tools really useful and usable for people in those categories. And as I say, when we do our surveys in Spanish, when we call you on the phone in a Pew survey, we ask you which language you prefer. If you prefer to take it in Spanish, you are less likely to be an internet and a broadband user. than if you are taking the survey in English, if you're Hispanic taking the survey in English. So there's something about language comfort, language proficiency, and being in an English-dominant culture that also sort of plays out in these data. I referred earlier to this plateauing of home broadband, and it's a really interesting story that ties to the rise of smartphones in part, and it ties to sort of a broader story that's always told in the technology adoption literature, which is at some point the market feels like it's saturated. You know, it's just you've reached the people you're going to reach through the normal mechanisms of the market, and something's going on with the last increment of people who are not users, and the adoption literature is pretty clear on this. It's not just affordability, although that's partly an issue with them. It's also about issues of literacy with the innovation, in this case with technology. It's also about, you know, stressors in life that are more common for those who are late adopters for things. They've just got other things that they need to worry about and what they have to devote their attention to. And learning new stuff through these technologies isn't necessarily the first thing that's on their mind. But it's an important part of the story that we're, you know, for 5 years now, or for 4 years now, there hasn't been much of a change in home broadband adoption, even though there are a lot of people in this room, and there's been a lot of effort by the government to bring more people access. We've documented, and it's become part of the sort of cultural conversation around this, that some people now are really connecting almost exclusively through their smartphones. They don't necessarily, they aren't denied access in other places, but they are so focused on this device, and it's certainly the one device that they've lavished their resources and attention on, that they are smartphone dependent. They don't have home broadband. That number has grown over time, and there are particular groups of people. So here I highlight, it's 13% of all adults, but it's young adults in particular are more likely than others to be smartphone dependent or smartphone reliant. 13% of those in poor households are, 12% of blacks are, and 13% of Latinos are in that smartphone dependent or smartphone reliant category, and the number has grown over time. We've got some new data that's just in, and we're really anxious to see what's happening in this story. But it's clear that you know, the smartphone is an important tool for access, and in many cases this exclusive or almost exclusive tool for it. And again, this raises big issues about capacity. Can people do the same stuff on these small screens that they can do on the big screen? And the answer, through a whole lot of work that we've done, is not quite. In some cases, not a lot in other cases, in part because those who are smartphone dependent often are on data cap plans, and they can't afford to pay for all the data they need or want. They don't necessarily have the Wi-Fi access that other people do to get that data, and so they also are just stressed out paying their bills sometimes, especially for their connectivity, so that they've got more breaks in their service and more breaks in the way that they can use these tools for getting ahead in life. So we've asked people in a whole lot of contexts, why don't you use the internet? And in some ways, and why don't you use broadband? In some ways, that's an unfair question. I mean, think about yourself. If you were asked, why don't you do something? The answer is, well, you know, I haven't thought about it, don't know about it, whatever it is. But the answers have been revealing because we've sort of walked people through some possible options about why they haven't done it. And these are some of the answers we get. Sorry, the slide is a little bit small. But you know, at the top of the list, when we ask this open-ended question, a fifth of people say, just not interested. Now, if you talk to them, what that really means, sometimes that does fall back on, I don't know how to use it, or I'm not real confident with it, or I don't feel like I have the support from my friends or others in my personal network to get me through the mechanisms of doing this. A bunch of people don't have computers. A bunch of people just think it's too difficult and frustrating. They've used the internet before and have withdrawn from it because it just didn't serve their needs, and it also was an annoyance in one way, shape, or form. So at the bottom of this slide, you'll see we sort of bunched up these open-ended answers into a variety of categories. And in America, relevance is the top and usability are the topmost issues. And by relevance, we mean people will say, I just don't know what it would be good for. you know, I like printed material, I like my old landline telephone, I like my, you know, television, and I don't necessarily know what this would add to my life. This is not new. When people don't adopt technology, and when there have been studies of this going back to the 1930s, this is a common refrain. I like the stuff that I've got now. I can afford the stuff I've got now. I know how to work it into my life, and I don't know what I'd get with this extra increment of connectivity or technology or something like that. Often, these people are enormously literate and knowledgeable about the problems of internet connection. So they will talk about predators, and they will talk about porn, and they will talk about disinformation or bad information. And they'll talk about bad actors who can kill your computer in one mistaken keystroke or something like that. But they don't necessarily know that, you know, the highest quality health information is available to them online. The best high quality news is available online. One of the best ways to interact with government is online. And so they know a lot about what problems would arise in their life if they were connected, and they know a lot less about some of the benefits that they could get. So in a way, if you're in the business of public education, that's a real opportunity for you to make sure that people know that the best quality stuff is also there with all of the concerns that people have about access. Usability is a much more sort of tech literacy kinds of things. I don't know how to use these tools. I don't have friends who can help me, coach me through. We get a lot of, actually I'll have a slide in a minute about, a lot of people talk about when I get a new device, when I get any new thing in my life, even like the app that we're being offered today, I need a friend to help me set it up. I can't do it on my own. It's too hard. One of the interesting things that's happened just in the past 2 years in our data is that cost and the affordability issue has risen among non-adopters. In other words, those things still stand. The relevancy and usability issues still stick in people's minds, but it's much more in evidence now that people talk about cost as the main barrier to their internet use. And again, most people would need, 2/3 of people say they need someone else to help them set up a device or help them set up the process if they needed it. And then, after all of this sort of standard stuff on adoption and usability and stuff, there's a new layer of concerns that people have about privacy and trust. We get this in our data a lot now. There were urgent conversations in this town in the pre-Snowden era. They've just ramped up since Snowden, in part because in the public imagination, the Snowden revelations in June of 2013 were close on followed by the revelations about the Target breach and then all of the other commercial retail breaches that occurred. And people are just kind of freaking out about that. They are concerned. They are anxious. It shows up in a lot of ways in our data. They don't necessarily trust their providers to secure their information. They don't necessarily think their information is out of the prying eyes of the government. They are concerned about what happens to their information after someone collects it. They don't know the third parties that get it. They don't know how profiles are made and stuff like that. There are a lot more people that are aware that their credit score is used in a whole host of ways to judge them and to assess them as economic and commercial actors, and they now think that there are all sorts of numbers that are attached to them in some way, shape, or form, but they don't know, they wouldn't even know how to begin to unpack that or figure out what that meant or who had the data and was judging them. So we asked a question about, am I talking too long?
No, it's okay.
Oh, okay. So we asked people if they'd adjusted their behaviors online since the Snowden revelations, and this is what we got. About 25% have changed at least one of these behaviors in the way they use email, search engine, and social media in the wake of things. And then finally, there's this issue about skills and readiness. We're going to put out a report later on this year that walks through the ways in which people even though they have access, even though they love their smartphones and things like that, they don't necessarily know all that they feel like they should know about how to find the best quality information, how to use their devices and things like that. So they need help setting it up. They are not confident that they can find the most trustworthy information, and they're not confident in their abilities to get things done online. So this is an evolving story, and the evolution continues, and it's partly because of folks in this room that the story is going to probably evolve more and probably in better ways. That you're going to take what you're learning, especially in sessions like this, and use it in ways that will bring the wonderful parts of technology access into people's lives, help them minimize the poorer things. And just speaking, I'm going to take off my nonpartisan hat just for a minute to say, as a citizen watching this happen, I'm grateful that you're in the midst of this. Because you guys belong in these conversations. You have enormously important things to contribute to them, and you're going to make our country a better place, and probably the world in important ways too. So thank you very much. Do we have time for questions, or?
I think we're a little bit short on time.
We're a little short on time. Thank you very much.
All right, so those of you using Chirpy, you guys, is it going well? Okay, my only request is we need to figure out how to put photos on it. All right, but I think it's been very helpful. The hashtags, the Twitter feed's going great. Thank you guys for, Lee, that was fantastic, great data. I think that's one of the things that the internet's taught us is how important analytics are to what we're doing. And a great intro to our next topic, which is connecting the next billion. And so, Kathy Novello, if you want to join us up here on stage, we are looking forward to hearing about not only the great work you have done over the past couple years, but what we have ahead of us in this area and how you recommend that we continue to be part of what's going on with this.
I think we've got a couple people through. I thought you were going to get a fireside at the table. Fireside at the table. Where do you want it? I think we're in a. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Karen McCabe. I'm with the IEEE. So I have the honor to help facilitate or moderate, ask these two very important people who are very well grounded in the issue and very knowledgeable about the challenges about connecting the unconnected, to have a little bit of a fireside chat. I know we're not sort of in the best situation for a fireside chat, and it's probably going to be about 90 degrees in DC, so calling it a fireside chat is going to be a little challenging. So we'll try to stay nice and cool in the AC. So basically the way we'll run the session is I will just ask Kathy and Marina, and I'll introduce them shortly, some questions, and to get their perspectives on, advancing solutions for connecting the unconnected, that we know it's more than just access, it's what we do with that access and how we get people to do meaningful things with that access so that they can have social and economic prosperity. So with that, let me introduce, I think most of us in the room do know Kathy Novello, who's the Undersecretary of State with the U.S. government. And we have also joining us Marina Ruggieri, who's the Vice President-elect of IEEE Technical Activities. So with that, Kathy, I'm going to start with you. So the IEEE and the White House were so excited to co-host, along with the World Bank, the Global Connect Stakeholders event that we had this past April. So for everyone here, can you explain the Global Connect Initiative and what its goals are?
Sure. So the Global Connect Initiative's goal is to connect 1.5 billion people to the internet by 2020. And a lot of that work's going on through all kinds of means. But we really wanted to both highlight the need to do this, as well as to provide a push to get that connectivity going. And to get the proper funding for that connectivity. So, what we based it on, and the reason why we co-hosted this whole big event that we had in April to sort of move this along with the World Bank, is because the World Bank did a study that showed that for every 10% increase in connectivity, there's a 1 to 2% increase in GDP. And so we launched this whole Global Connect initiative at the UN General Assembly last fall, and then this spring at the bank fund meetings, we pulled together all of the investment banks, the multilateral investment banks, and the finance ministers of over 40 countries. The reason being that we're trying to really spread the word. Everybody in this room knows how important connectivity is and is busy working on it. But there are lots of barriers to improving connectivity more globally, and one of them is finance and funding. And multilateral development banks, which are supposed to be funding infrastructure, have not heretofore seen the internet as infrastructure. And so we've been trying to say, you're thinking about roads, and yes, the Appian Way still exists in Rome and going out, but the new Appian Way is really the internet, and we've got to look at it that way. And the results that we had from that was a pledge to double the amount of funding by the multilateral development banks to work on this, but also to penetrate the finance ministers and make them understand that in their own country, spending money on connectivity is a very important thing, and it's going to pay them economic dividends. The other thing that we have sort of underpinned this whole push on connectivity to do is that just connecting people per se is good, but if you don't have the right underpinnings of policy, then you're really going to run into problems. And those are things like competition in the marketplace, making things affordable, making sure that there is digital literacy so people can actually use these wonderful tools. So we're sort of working on all of those layers, and we're so happy to be able to co-sponsor an event alongside of that with IEEE that is actually taking all the folks who actually know what they're doing, all the engineers and everybody who is, like you, very involved on a day-to-day basis, to figure out, what really makes sense. And the roll-up-the-sleeves attitude, I think, there was really fantastic, and looking at regions, and every region, needs slightly different solutions and how to do that. So it is great to have these partnerships, and really vital, and I think all of you are vital too, because we won't get there without a multi-stakeholder approach to this problem, which is what the IGF stands for.
Thanks, Kathy. So that's a really nice segue to Marina, and a question we have for you is, briefly tell us a little bit about the IEEE, but more so why IEEE cares about global connectivity and why we got engaged.
So good morning to everybody, and thank you very much, Kathy, for your wonderful words about IEEE that makes my introduction really more responsible. And so we feel very much the responsibility of what you were saying, because IEEE, many of you probably know, but is the largest association of scientists and technologists around the world. We are covering about 500,000 members and more than 160 countries. And this is a big responsibility because there is a large diversification in terms of geography, but also in terms of technical topics. But as many of the technical people know very well, to be only technical is not enough anymore. And so this is the very big challenge that IEEE is taking very seriously, also thanks to the partnership and to the solicitation that we are receiving through Kathy and through the activities that we are doing here. The fact of being technical can help to solve issues, but the technical matter has to be coped with other dimensions like policy, like education, and like also the ethic dimension. All these words are very much matched with the word connecting, global connection. Why IEEE is interested in global connection? IEEE mission is advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. Now, how you can think to do this without a global connection? So this is part of the mission itself. It's become, through the digitalization and to the extraordinary progress in this area, the submission of advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. And so I think that this is part of our mission, and also is an extraordinary mean, the connectivity, to do many things, including, for instance, make our planet sustainable. So this is one of the topics that can be done very easily if we are connected and if we share the same culture. So I hope I replied to your question, Karen.
That's fine. So Kathy, we've seen recently an executive order and President Obama's recent endorsement of the State Department's Global Connect initiative. So can you explain a little bit of what that really means for all of us moving forward?
Well, I think, the idea of the Global Connect initiative is to pull together a whole of government approach, a partnership with the private sector, with international organizations, and as well as with other countries. And so it is trying to help be a catalyst for all of the things that are going on, and drive them forward with principles. And so President Obama issued an executive order that was put out at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, and basically saying, Global Connect is an important thing for the White House, for the administration, for the U.S. government as a whole, and that, obviously we are leading that, but there's lots of folks in the U.S. government that are working on it. And I think it was a way to highlight the connection between connectivity and entrepreneurship. Is the reason why it was put out when it was put out, because every country wants to have entrepreneurs. Every country wants to have its own Silicon Valley. And you can't do that without connectivity. But you also can't have better access to medicine and access to markets, global markets, and access to educational opportunities without this kind of connectivity in a modern world. So, those are the things that are going to build the entrepreneurs of tomorrow. And so that was the purpose of the whole executive order.
I know with that said, there's so many great initiatives going on around the world on a global scale. There's a tremendous amount of local activities as well, on the private and the public side of things. So Marina, based on your response to the first question, can you elaborate a little bit and share what IEEE may be doing and who might be partnering with to help address these connectivity issues as part of this larger ecosystem?
So basically, connecting the unconnected is a multidisciplinary topic. And I want to insist about these 4 dimensions that I see very clearly in this topic: the technical dimension, the policy dimension, the education dimension, and the ethic dimension. So these are 4 legs of this topic. IEEE is doing many things, but let me just highlight a couple of those. One are the initiative. We call them initiative. They sound like technical initiatives, but they are not, because they are already multidisciplinary in the sense that I mentioned. So they cover the 4 dimensions that are needed in order for the initiative to be to have a result that is meaningful and lasting. That is what you want when you do an initiative. So from this viewpoint, I can make a long list, but I don't want to bother you with that. But just say to you some keywords, key names of initiative that are completely related with the topic connecting the unconnected. One, probably the most trivial, is the Internet initiative. This is pretty clear. But when I start talking to you and say that we are also thinking about software-defined networking. You think that I'm already talking about how we want to do it at the network level. And if I say about 5G, you start thinking about what is after. So this is another initiative that makes sense with this respect. But let me also go a little bit further and connecting with the world internet, also the brain initiative. Brain, yes, our brain, and the way we interact with the machine. This is another approach to the internet. So there are many of these initiatives. Some of them are just starting, some of them are more mature. And this is one way in which IEEE is thinking about the topic and making our almost 500,000 members around the world be connected with us in these topics. Another way is a more recent tool that we have, that is the community. The community is a wonderful world because it's a spontaneous aggregation of technical and non-technical people, IEEE and non-IEEE members that deal with a specific topic. The communities can be bidimensional, in my view, both geographical and technical. And so if you connect these two dimensions, the vertical and the horizontal one, you can have communities that can be really impressing in their local activities for the global vision. And as Kathy knows very well, because this was one of the conclusions of the meeting in Washington, we have to go local to be global. And the community is one of the answers to this point. So IEEE is working in these two dimensions, and I will be more than happy if you want to have more information to provide them to you.
Thanks, Marina. I think that's a nice segue as well. When we talk about IGF, there's the international IGF that will be in Guadalajara in early December. But IGF is strength in a way is also all the regional and national IGFs, and what we're sitting here today experiencing. Sort of talking at these global issues at a local level. So with that, Kathy, how can the IGF community support these global connectivity issues and challenges?
Well, I think, you're all here, there's so many different things that the IGF deals with, but I think making connectivity something that is a focus is really important, and putting together the brain power and all of the different activities that are going on, and sort of making those, not that any one person or organization is going to control all of that. That's just not the nature of the internet. But having this very webbed approach to connectivity, and understanding that and looking at how what you're doing can be spread to other colleagues and other at the big IGF or in other localizations, I think is hugely important. I think also looking at these policy underpinnings, how do we get competition into the marketplace? How do we look at training digital literacy in populations so that folks can see what's the utility of this and actually use it? How do we work on content that can be used for all of this? How do we work on the technical side of this and looking at how to get connectivity to rural populations? I think there's a whole list of things that are the practical hands-on things that all of you sitting in this room can really have an impact on. And it's an impact on those who right now aren't in the fortunate position that we're in of being able to, Google something or to be able to have that kind of access. And I can just say, I was in China a couple of weeks ago for a big discussion with the Chinese government on all issues, and didn't have any access to the internet while I was there, and it was really driving me crazy. I mean, I just, something would happen and I would want to say, well, I want more information about that, and I couldn't do it. So I realize in my own daily life how much I use it, and when you can't use it at all, you really think about all those people who don't have access ever. And what can we do to deal with that? And that's about innovation, and that's about all of these other kinds of pieces that go together.
It's so true. And, you know, and to the earlier points that we're making, it's definitely a community approach to address these challenges and to help advance solutions, but it's also multidisciplinary as well. You know, we can look at it very much from a technical side, there's a policy side, ethical side, et cetera, and then, you know, just think about cross-industry sectors and domains. But, you know, I think we're trying at IEEE also to get more of the engineers and the scientists more engaged in this to bring that perspective. So with that, Marina, can you tell us a little bit what your perspective is on why engineers and scientists should care about connectivity?
So that's a very good point. Naturally, the connectivity is part of our life now, as Katie was mentioning. So I think it is mandatory to have the capability to be connected in order to participate in a very aware and fruitful way to the global society. So this is a basic need. It's starting to be a basic need. On the other hand, this can improve everyday life, so it can be a means to improve everyday life of many people. But so now, let me make this kind of thought that I want to share with you, and maybe something can come after that. Naturally, the connection is a fruit of the crazy digitalization era. So we are living the digitalization, and the progress has been extraordinary and extremely fast in terms of years with respect to the result that we have. There is no way we can stop it. So we are in the middle of something that we cannot stop. So we better cope in the better way with that. Because there is a risky part on this, that we have to cope with that, and we have to find solution before the issues become very, very serious. So what is the risk? The balance must be maintained between the digitalized and the non-digitalized sector of the population. So we need to make our effort to make everybody be digitalized, because we cannot stop the process. So we better do it in order to cover everybody. Same thing for the internet access, that is the next consequence to the digitalization. So the imbalance between not connected and connected people should be covered. The digital divide, as we heard, is still a very wide gap. And there are billions of people that are not even connected with a mobile phone, and many of them are not connected with any internet access. So we need to fix that. But let me also tell you that probably we can do the next phase, so covering the next billion, better than we did phase one, because the growth was out of control. And with little or no education, we accessed the internet. We used it with many rights and no duties. With no education, probably you get little ethics. So we need to do much better, and so this is why it's very important to be all together to do phase two, to cover the unconnected with a multidimensional approach, technical, policy-related, ethical, and based on education. In this way, we will for sure have the effect of covering the unconnected in the best way without avoiding issues that then have to be fixed after we cover the people. So we can do it in the best way together.
Thank you. So Kathy, the U.S. government has taken a great lead in bringing these issues forward. So why did you decide to champion Global Connect now, sort of kind of building upon what Marina just shared with us? And why do you think it matters to connect the rest of the world?
Well, as I said, I think the real catalyst for looking at this now was the hard data that showed the consequence of connectivity so positive, as well as the fact that the gap between the connected and unconnected is just getting larger and larger. So if you're not connected, you're not just standing in place, you're actually falling farther and farther behind. And so from our perspective, we felt like it was very important to try to be a catalyst for pulling together this multi-dimensional approach and actually getting folks thinking about, in their own countries, about having a plan to connect their own population, which has to spring from them, as well as how do we bring to bear the resources that can allow that to happen and the innovation that comes from the private sector, as well as all of these sort of building block principles for using the internet once it's there. So I think the catalyst for us was seeing the hard data that showed that connectivity, it's our instinct that connectivity mattered, but seeing the incredible tool for development that connectivity really is. I mean, if you think about it, if you can raise your GDP by 1 to 2 percentage points, that rising tide is going to float all boats. And the ability to have access for all kinds of people to do things like do better and more efficient farming, have access to markets and be able to sell what you're making, you know, at the high time instead of the low time, to, you know, for kids to have better access to education and access to the world, really. So, I mean, it just brings all kinds of good things. And while there are certainly risks, and I agree with Marina that we have to think about them, we can't let that stop us. We have to do this in a planful way, and really make sure that we're doing everything we can to bridge the digital divide.
Thank you. So Marina, last question, and then we hopefully can get some audience interaction and have some questions from our great participants today. So we know that there's sort of many challenges with the connectivity issue, but from your perspective, what do you think are some of the more significant technical challenges moving forward in providing affordable and meaningful access?
So certainly it's fascinating at the level of challenge, what we can do to improve the connectivity. I think there are two main areas that we can think about. One is related to the network. So not only to the architecture, but to the softwareization of the network. This is a very important challenge because it makes the network flexible. You can integrate the different means, the wired, the wireless, the satellite. So you can really create a coverage, but also can create a flexibility that only the softwareization can provide. So one keyword from the network side would be softwareization. Another area of large improvement is the terminal. If we want to connect everybody, everything should be easy, understandable. Even through an educational process, everything should be easy and compatible. So on the terminal area, there are many challenges. One, certainly, again, is to improve the softwareization part of the terminal. But the other one is to make it more, let me say, matchable with the human body. Our fingers are not compatible with the device, and we have a lot of challenge that we are assisting in terms of technological advances that we can use, but think that the user, the body of the user, is part of the network, and the terminal distance between the user and the terminal should be kept smaller and smaller, thanks to the progress not only in the technological side, but also in the bioengineering side. So this is one challenge as we are thinking about the future, softwareization and distance reduction between the user body and the terminal, and maybe one day reduction of the distance between the user body and the network itself. So the body can become part of the network function with a full integration. And this needs naturally a lot of competence, so we have to add another dimension to our multidimensional and multi-topic vision, that is everything that is related with biology and with medical expertise.
Wow. So I think we've made great strides over the last decade. And as to your point, looking at the challenges of phase 2, but I think as we have discussed, I think we go into it more informed, and we should probably leverage, what we've learned from the past as we move forward. So with that, I would like to open the floor to some questions for our speakers, if you have any. Comments? Questions?
everybody's shocked.
Okay. Don't be shy. Thank you.
So Kathy,
Just a minute. Can we get you on the mic?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. Kathy, this is great. So what's the next step on the Global Connect, right? So I know that a lot of work's been done with the, again, your point, the MDGs, or MDBs, I'm sorry, and getting them to focus on infrastructure, as infrastructure. So you can tell us a little bit next steps.
Yeah. So, so getting them to commit to actually fund things was, an important step, but now they have to fund things. And so part of what we're doing is really reaching out to countries who have expressed an interest, who maybe don't have a broadband plan yet, for their own country, so they can start figuring one out and providing assistance as they ask for it. Part of the reason why we leveraged other countries is because other countries have initiatives here too, and so we don't have to do everything ourselves. But we wanted to get everybody on the same page in terms of the principles that are going to underlie, how do you think about doing a broadband plan, and then what do you do once it's there. Getting more countries to have plans, then getting the actual funding for projects to go forward. And right after, for example, right after we pulled together all these finance ministers, the Tunisians approached us and said, we want to be the first Global Connect country, and we would like to connect all of our schools to the internet within the next 2 years. And so how can we go about that? So we were matchmaking with the EBRD and Tunisia to try to, sort of figure out the funding for that and then the plan. And so we are going to be now kind of in that phase of let's roll up our sleeves and look at specific countries and specific projects that can go forward. And they're not all going to be funded by the U.S. government. That's not the idea. The idea is that we're kind of a catalyst for these things to happen, and also can serve in a way as a matchmaker for the right people to be talking to the right people to make these things happen. So that's what's next.
Yes, please. This nice young man who will get you the mic. Oh.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I also have a question about the Global Connect. As far as I understand, different from the energy infrastructure, the broadband infrastructure is mainly driven by innovation, and the participation of the private sector is very important. And can you tell us a little bit more about how you're trying to engage those private sectors into your initiative?
Yes, so the private sector, actually CEOs of some of the big companies who are doing innovation in this whole broadband infrastructure area were present when we brought together finance ministers and the multilateral development banks, and we have been working with the private sector all along because, as I said, the innovation is going to come from the private sector. And there's a lot of projects already the private sector is working on its own, and we wanted to be able to highlight all of that work and the fact that there is innovation here, so we don't just all have to throw up our hands and say, well, rural connectivity is too hard, so we're not going to do it. And we wanted to highlight that to the finance ministers and the MDBs who, this is not usually their space, right? The communications ministers, they all know this, but, in the totem pole of governments, finance ministers are sometimes a little bit higher. In fact, I would say all the time. So I think the idea was to start really broadening out this circle of folks who understand that there's solutions out there, and the private sector is going to be the ones to bring them, and I think everybody understands that.
Thanks, Kathy.
If I can, I'd like to go back and ask Mr. Rainey a question about some of the data, specifically the distinction between using a smartphone and using broadband, because more and more smartphones can be a hotspot. And I can use my iPad through my smartphone as easily at home or on the road. And there are data caps, but different carriers have much higher data caps than others. And so it seems that distinction between using a smartphone and using broadband is fuzzing. And people with a smartphone might very well have laptops or tablets or other devices, and so not be constrained by that tiny interface. And it seems like there's a continuum there that the data didn't entirely reflect.
Well, thank you. I think we're just going to take one last question because we are running a little bit over time.
So yes, there is a
Thank you.
continuum. Yes, people are quite clever about doing workarounds that are tied to Wi-Fi. We're just beginning to capture that. It's somewhat hard to walk people through the mechanisms of that in a survey, but you can absolutely see it in the observational data. There, you can watch people really taking advantage of Wi-Fi and doing it in quite robust ways.
Well, thank you. I think we're going to close this part of the session, and I want to really a great round of applause for Kathy and Marina. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, and you're going to bring us into the next session so we can get our next level group of panelists up here, please.
So we're just going to switch out and bring our lightning talk speakers up.
All right, just give us a second to get the panel up here. After this, we're going to have a coffee break, just so you guys can anticipate that.
Hi, Jonathan. Nice to see you. Do you know which name tags are? Which one says Jonathan? Nice to meet you.
I can't remember. I know we have name tags.
So I'll play a video at some point when it's my turn.
Marina, you can take your phone. You don't see who you are. I don't know. Okay, yeah, I know. Oh, there we go. Exactly. So we'll keep him right on the end, so that makes it easier.
All right, can we get everybody back into their seats, and we're going to get started here.
So we ready?
Yes, right.
All right. We are moving into a lightning round discussion. Karen, you're going to have to just take charge here.
So he's ready.
You just switch there.
Yeah, I just figured it'd make it easier for him to come in. Okay, everybody. Hello?
All right, you guys ready?
We're going to start. Hello again. My name is Karen McCabe. I know I moderated the first session, and this is our lightning round session. So I am very honored to be here with this esteemed list of panelists. This is a lightning round series, so basically our speakers will have about 4 or 5 minutes to share some of their insights on this topic. And let me do a round of introductions quickly, and then we'll just launch right into it. So we have Namina Amendi, who's a Microsoft Fellow. We have with us Kevin Martin, who's the Vice President for Mobile and Global Access Policy at Facebook. We have Jonathan Mesger, Chief of Party Global Broadband and Innovations Alliance. Namini Rubin, Senior Advisor, U.S. House of Representatives and Foreign Affairs. And Carolina Rosini, Vice President, International Policy. So with that, I'm going to launch right in with Namina, and your lightning round starts now.
Just give me 1 second. I have a video that I'd like to start with.
Oh, sorry.
So it's a pleasure to be here. So they usually say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I thought maybe a video might be worth a little bit more. So just to give you a flavor of what we're working on at Microsoft to connect the next billion.
Half the world does not have access. Half the world does not have access. Without it, you are limited in what you can learn, what you can do, what impact you can have. This is an internet cafe in Kenya. To the people here, it represents opportunity. To make it possible, Microsoft partnered with the local startup and found a way to use TV waves to bring affordable internet virtually anywhere.
In the next 5-10 years, we'll be producing engineers from this place, doctors from the school within these areas. Everyone will be coming to believe internet can change the life of people from this place.
When technology empowers every person to do great things, possibility becomes limitless.
All right, so at Microsoft, our mission really is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. We emphasize on the planet so that we're not just thinking about a small business in a place like Michigan or a kid out in New York City. We're really talking about everybody on the planet, including a kid in rural Kenya, where I actually grew up without an internet connection. So that really is our mission. But this becomes very difficult in this day and age because about 4.5 billion people around the world do not have internet access. Here in the United States, it's about 5 million, I believe. And so it really becomes difficult if you're a cloud-based company like us. We no longer send you a CD in the mail, right, with an access code on it. These days, we usually just turn on a tap once you sign on, and at the end of the month, if you don't pay, we turn it off. So that's really how we work these days, and it becomes really difficult if people are not connected to the internet. So when we talk about internet connection at Microsoft, what are we really thinking about? We're not thinking about people just being able to send a WhatsApp message or a Facebook message here and there. We're really talking about internet connection that drives productivity, right? So we're talking about you being able to use Skype for business. We're talking about an education institution being able to have their students really download papers, work on papers, upload their homework. So that's the kind of internet we want. So we want it to be ubiquitous, to be everywhere whenever it's needed at whatever point in time. We need it to be robust. So it needs to be able to support applications that are really latency sensitive, right? So applications that really consume a lot of data. That's what we really need, and that's what we're working on. So how are we going about this? We really focus on partnerships, right? So 3 words: partnership, partnership, partnership. That's how we're really going about this. And some of the partnerships that we have about 18 projects worldwide.